I mean, I guess if it's wrong, no one can double check us, right? And welcome back to a season wrap-up edition of the D3 Datacast. We are back from Fort Wayne, and I guess it's a little bit bittersweet, Matt, to wrap up the season. This has been a great kind of weekly flow for us, although we're not getting this in our usual Monday time slot. But there's no week to look forward to in here in Division III basketball. But it's been a great season. We had a great time in Fort Wayne, although maybe not quite as good as the Christopher Newport fans, players, coaches, and all involved with the captains program there. They probably had the best weekend out of all of us. Congratulations to John Krikorian's team, his players, his staff, the whole Christopher Newport community on their first national championship. They were great all weekend, and they had to be because we saw four really good teams. We got three really good games. And Matt, I wanted to take just the first part of the show here to get through some acknowledgments. It's kind of part thank yous, part congratulations. I don't know what you want to call it, but this whole weekend was really a culmination of a lot of effort by the men's basketball national committee. Just wanted to give their recognition here. Of course, starting with the chair, Sarah Quattrocki, the vice chairs, Luke Flakertzy, and Rick Ferry, and then each of the national committee members here by name: Paul Booth, Charlie Mason, John Alisi, David McGrail, Cam Fuller, Ryan Kane, and Doc Esslinger. We had a great tournament, and it seemed to us that everything in Fort Wayne went very smoothly. And that's a credit to the people here on the national committee. I think they did a great job. I know throughout the process we do a lot of debating and talking and this and that, but I know how much they care, how much effort goes into this, and the fact that we got such a great Final Four is really a testament to all the work that they put in.
Yeah, I said this to a few people. I probably tweeted this out. The Final Four in Fort Wayne is a chance for Division III basketball to feel big. I think all season long it feels kind of small. We're in these pockets of conferences and regionality. But here in Fort Wayne, it's kind of like getting the student athletes under the bright lights. Everything looks great from my perspective. And like you said, this is a testament to the work that these folks and probably others, I'm sure, did to make that go smoothly. And we had a fantastic time. It looked like the student athletes had a fantastic time. Christopher Newport had a fantastic time. And so it was really fun to be there. And I would encourage anyone who hasn't been there, coaches, fans, get a chance if you have to get down there because it's a good experience.
Yeah, you're right. I'm sure there's so many people that we'd be forgetting or that deserve our thanks and congratulations that we couldn't name. Of course, Manchester University is the Division III institution partnering with Fort Wayne as the host here. You have people from the NCAA, the men's basketball committee. Of course, then there's the regional committees uh, that are doing their work on a regional level. And yeah, it was just an awesome event. Like you said, it really had a big stage feel. I think even compared to last year, it seems like it really took a step forward. The overall presentation in the arena was great. The lighting, everything, I mean, it had a real big game atmosphere, and it was great to see. I mean, think back, like I said, it was even seemed bigger than last year, but certainly going back to 2005 when we were in Salem, Virginia, as students following Kelvin to that Final Four run. Um, yeah, it was cool. It was a bigger, style atmosphere than what you usually see in most on-campus places. But I think what we witnessed this past weekend in Fort Wayne, just with the overall production, was really top notch.
Yeah, and before we move on, major shouts to John Painter, Maryville College Sports Communications Department, making sure everything was kind of smooth for us, had all the information we needed, taking care of everyone. Uh, Fantastic. I really appreciated all of his efforts in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. Well deserved there. So moving on to the championship game, of course, we had the day in between, so we could kind of talk about the semifinals we saw and kind of preview the final. And at that time we thought, hey, we're probably in for another really good game like we saw in the semifinal games. And boy, it we got even better than what could be expected there. With, it felt like whiplash there in the final minute with, uh, Ty Henderson makes a shot, gets fouled to put Christopher Newport up, and then Christian Parker down at the other end. yeah, gets the bucket, and it looks like maybe we're going to overtime, but then the ball comes in. Trey Barber gets it, takes it all the way down the length of the court, and scores the bucket at the buzzer. And it's really, you take the whole weekend in totality, it's hard to see how you could get a collection of three games that turned out better than they did. Of course, the fan base, there's certain fan bases wish for maybe different outcomes, but just as a Division III basketball fan, boy, those three games really were like the perfect cherry on top of a great season. I You can't imagine getting a more exciting set of games than that in what you really want to be kind of the crowning games of your season.
Yeah, as a neutral, could not ask for better games. Could not ask for better finishes. I think all the games were within uh, a possession, probably within the last minute or last 30 seconds or so, all down to the wire. There were some big leads that had margins closed in the second half. We saw that in a semifinal and in the championship game a little bit there. So just yeah, fantastic weekend. The basketball was tremendous, and it's hard. It's going to be hard for future years to top this, I think.
So ultimately, there was a Final Four all tournament team that was named, and we, between the two of us, we did have a collective ballot there on Media Row, and it turned out that our ballot matched exactly how the all tournament team was announced in the arena. Trey Barber was named the most outstanding player. His teammate from Christopher Newport, John Hines, was also on the all tournament team. From Mount Union, it was Christian Parker and Colin Gurley. And then rounding out the all tournament team, George Visconti from Swarthmore. And like we said, this matched perfectly with how we had our ballot, right down to who we had as MOP. Now, I will say that the ballots were collected a couple minutes early, and we did have a little or situation in there, but we don't need to go into that because Christopher Newport won, and Trey Barber was the most outstanding player.
Yeah, and when we were talking back and forth, I feel like we were trying to watch the last few minutes really closely, but then we're like trying to quickly point out who we should think was on the ballot. We had a lot of other discussions, great players who we saw throughout the weekend that could make our kind of all tournament team here. But yeah, I think these were very deserving players as well.
So also this week we had the final top 25 poll from d3hoops.com. And so, Matt, not surprisingly, you did have Christopher Newport number one. Now, as an outsider to the whole process, I would agree that the tournament champion should be voted number one in the final poll. However, after that, I think anything's up for grabs. However, you do have Mount Union number two. I don't think it needs to be an automatic that the runner-up is number two, but I think very deserving here. Mount Union entered the tournament very highly ranked, played a as close of a championship game as you can get, and a very deserving, I think, number two here. And as it turns out, they were a near unanimous number two in the final poll.
Yeah, yeah, for me, just starting at the top with Christopher Newport, I did just because we had seen them win the championship. I didn't consider anyone else for the number one because I think they deserve that spot by winning it out on the court, and I'm fine with that. Happy with that on my ballot. They're great. I think they were. I should have gone back and looked. They were pretty much probably top five like my whole season long. Hanging out at like number three for much of the year. So Christopher Newport, one of those teams we kind of saw wire to wire as a top five team. I started considering even like Randolph Macon right at number two. Ultimately, with what we saw from Mount Union this weekend, I think they're just as good as Christopher Newport. If they played that game again, Mount Union could very easily win. Who knows? So I'm happy to keep those two teams at the top. Then there's probably a kind of a group there with Oswego State, Randolph Macon, UW-Whitewater, Swarthmore. I consider that top six to be almost kind of one tier. Those top teams, basically the Final Four plus Oswego and Randolph Macon, probably about as good as each other. I think we saw that this weekend. We saw that in the sectional weekend as well. Maybe teams 7 through 11 or so is maybe a second tier, kind of those um, the next level of teams that we've seen throughout the season that had pretty good tournament runs that we saw here in March. And then maybe like 12 through 20, like Hampton Sydney through East Texas Baptist, kind of another tier, very solidly in my top 25 kind of teams. For me, once I got to 21 through 25, and then there's probably like another 5 or 10 teams past that. Those are the teams that were kind of in the mix for maybe my last 5 spots. Some teams that didn't make the cut that you kind of consider in that mix would be maybe like a St. Thomas, Texas. Who else might have been in that mix? Maybe you could consider Mary Washington or Hamilton, Carleton, kind of teams like that around that those spots. Several others I haven't named, but I kind of was thinking about this ballot in terms of tiers, and that's kind of how it broke down for me.
So you got that pencil and paper out working on your preseason ballot for next year. You gonna take a breath.
I'm going to take a little bit of a breath. I haven't. I've actually started to think like which types of teams am I going to consider very highly next year. Right off the bat, they're at number 5, UW-Whitewater. They return I think basically everyone, if not literally everyone. I think they're going to be very high. I think there's a couple of other teams in similar boats as well. So I was kind of in thinking about teams with high returners. I think Oswego State is returning a whole bunch as well. Those types of teams I've already kind of started to prep for as far as who might be in my preseason top 25. But no, I haven't actually put pen to paper and made any sort of list. I think I'll let that breathe for a while. Maybe come back in the fall, October or so, and see where we're at.
And thanks to the COVID year, you look at our roster now, and it used to be that you see senior and you say, okay, we can cross that name off. But now with the fifth year up for grabs with everyone during that COVID year, who knows what that really means? And you kind of have to wait for a roster to come out to know if a senior's back, because they could be.
And if they're back or if they're transferring somewhere else to start pursuing a graduate degree or something like that. We've seen players transfer around the country who finished their 4 years at their school. Maybe their current school doesn't have any graduate programs or doesn't have the graduate program they're looking to pursue. So they look for something else or maybe D2 or whatever. But yeah, could players, quality players that are listed as seniors, you don't know, maybe they could show up on another roster somewhere at some point in the fall.
You mentioned Whitewater, but Christopher Newport looks like a team that's going to have a lot back.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll be definitely in the conversation, I think, as the preseason number one heading into next year. But lots of time to discuss and debate that. Uh, Matt, so all the games are played. We have our own little contest to wrap up here. We had our final pick slate here for the Final Four. And, well, yes, the contest is over. We do have an official champion between the two of us.
Yeah, so let's run through the pick slate and then we'll look at the leaderboard. So last week we had 2 games that we knew. The first one was Christopher Newport. The computer line was 1.5 in favor of Christopher Newport. We had both taken Christopher Newport and they did cover. They won by 3. The second game was UW-Whitewater plus 4.5 against Mount Union. Zach, you had taken Whitewater. I had taken Mount Union. The computer line was 4.5. The margin was 4. So you won that one. And then we had the national championship game, Call Your Shot. We had both selected Mount Union to win and Christopher Newport to win. So we had gotten points for selecting the correct championship teams. And then you had gone one way with Mount Union. I had gone the other way with Christopher Newport as the winner. So I get that point, giving me, looking at the leaderboard here, giving me 4 points, 4 wins and 1 loss on the week. Zach, you were also 4-1 as well. And that means I maintain my 1 point advantage for you. Season long contest. Zach, you were 48-41. I was 49-40. And I win by 1 point. A little bit of a surprise for me. I thought this would be the major talking point in Fort Wayne, but it did not appear that anyone was talking about this. So I don't know what was up with that, but I do win by 1, even if you and I were the only ones in the building that cared.
Oh, well, maybe next year.
Maybe next year people will care about it. Probably not.
Well, maybe next year I'll beat you.
No, you won't.
Okay. So no slate to go over because there's no more games.
No games.
The games are over.
We don't have a schedule for next year. Otherwise, we could start putting together the week 1 slate, but I think that's going to have to wait until the fall. So if anyone has any ideas for pick slate throughout the off season, we can just pick random things.
All right, that also takes us into our last mailbag of the season. Matt,
Mailbag.
we have a couple things to address here. Mailbag. The first one comes from Riley Zayas, who it was great to get to spend some time with in Fort Wayne. Riley does great work for d3hoops.com and also on his own covering the women's side of things. Really impressive young man. So if you're not following Riley, make sure you start, because Riley's going to do great things. All right, so Riley's question here was, of all the players on the Final Four teams you saw in Fort Wayne, in your opinion, who had the biggest year-to-year improvement from last season to this one? Now, Matt, I'm going to jump in here and take this because this is really an interesting question because, as I look and think about the Final Four teams that we got here this year, I don't really think it was about any returning player making a huge jump. I think in a lot of cases these teams had really solid cores returning and they had the right pieces coming in fresh for one reason or another. Mount Union had Colin Gurley transferring back from Youngstown State. Jeffrey Mansfield comes over to play a grad year from Wilmington. That was just a heavily veteran team. Newport, um, kind of a similar situation. Trey Barber coming back this year. You had uh, John Hines coming back, but they were kind of known commodities and maybe took a little bit of a step forward, but like not like a huge leap. But you look what got Newport over the hump. Maybe it's like Colin Hines is a freshman there, and in February kind of moved into the starting lineup. Was playing big time minutes there through the Final Four. Caleb Furr had the big championship game going, what was it, 4 for 4 from three? Well, he transferred in from D2. So again, it's, in addition, but it wasn't that kind of internal growth. And then, even with UW-Whitewater, you look at Miles Barnstable as a freshman and also his brother Delvin Barnstable coming in as a freshman. So really there, it was a little bit, more about new pieces being added to an existing really great core. Um, Swarthmore, I think largely is the same, but I think here's where maybe you get your best answer, and that comes with George Corzine. And this was a story I didn't actually know and learned over the weekend. But George Corzine went to Swarthmore as a tennis player, wasn't recruited for basketball. He went there as a tennis player. Uh, and I don't know the exact situation about it, but ended up deciding, hey, he wanted to play basketball, and you know, you, I don't know how that phone call or conversation goes at many D3s, let alone a really good program like Swarthmore, when a tennis player calls up and says, "Hey, coach, I'd like to give basketball a try." But I guess being 6'7" helps in that conversation. Um, so yeah, he got into the rotation actually last year as a junior, um, but played about 13 minutes a game. Then this year bumped that up to almost 19 minutes a game, played even more than that during the tournament run, maxing out to play 27 minutes actually against Christopher Newport. So it was kind of interesting. As I look at a lot of these teams, it was mostly about kind of what they were able to add um, that they didn't have, as opposed to just kind of this growth or maturation. Until Swarthmore, George Corzine, I think, was the best answer to this question directly.
Yeah, I'll always be the first to admit that when it comes to like a particular player around the country, I don't necessarily follow the individual names until we get closer to the tournament time, and the number of teams can whittle down a little bit. So I unfortunately don't have a great answer to this, but I think yeah, you're correct. Some players I hadn't seen before. It was nice to get to see them up close this weekend, and George Corzine was one that impressed me in that semifinal as far as a player that I wasn't really expecting to be a major contributor for them in that game, but he really played a lot of good minutes. And was one of the kind of impressive bigs down there for Swarthmore. But yeah, unfortunately for me, like I always point to maybe someone like Ryan Scott who has maybe a better perspective on things like this as far as following players. So I don't have a great answer, Zach. I do like your answer. We saw a lot of tremendous players. I think maybe Mount Union was more of the veteran team. I think maybe Christopher Newport was more of maybe a balanced team in terms of ages. I'm excited for what someone like Colin Hines could be in the future. I think he was impressive as well. So maybe my answer will be a little more forward looking. I'll be interested to follow some of these players who have eligibility remaining, like Trey Barber. What does he do next year as well? Now that I kind of got to see them up close. But one thing I did learn about individual players, and I think Zach, maybe you pointed this out about Miles Barnstable, is that just the difference between watching a player on stream all season or during the tournament and seeing them from like the first couple of rows in the arena. You sometimes notice a quickness or an ability there that you don't quite capture on video as the camera's kind of panning back and forth. And there was a lot of good basketball on display this past weekend, and it was just amazing to be able to see that kind of from the front row there.
And you kind of hit on it. I mean, there's so many teams and so many players, it can be difficult. I made a comment. I think it was either kind of in between the All-Star game and the championship game, or maybe it was just, yeah, I
Oh
think it
yeah.
was in between games. I think it was with Carlton coach Brian Kershaw. I was just saying that there's so many teams, it's hard to be paying attention even as closely as we do.
Mm-hmm.
All the guys playing in that, and you get to that All-Star game, and you're like, shoot, I wish I had been seeing more of this guy
Yeah.
or more of that guy. It's just it's hard to do when there's almost 420
Yeah.
teams out there, and it's tough.
Yeah.
But you know, throw that dart at what stream you're going to watch, and you're going to likely run into some good teams and some good players. It's just hard to keep track of them all throughout the course of a whole season.
Yeah, that is one thing I would like to do better on in my personal watching is to identify some of the top players to be watching out for during these streams. Sometimes I'm more focused at the team level, and so I kind of just watch games, watch chunks of games, check out high level scores and things, and I don't always get into the nitty gritty. But I think that would be a way to get even deeper into D3 hoops for me if that is somewhat possible. But maybe I'll do that next year.
All right, we have one more from another great viewer. This comes from Max Fan at Go Maccabees on Twitter. Will there be any end of year awards for the most submitted mailbag questions, best and worst mailbag questions, or most efficient mailbag questions? So, Matt, are we going to get into mailbag analytics here?
We haven't started yet. I would love to see Max Fan start a podcast, the D3 Datacast Question Cast, and where they can go through all of the best and worst questions. I don't have any awards. I think maybe we can do kind of like an everyone who has submitted a question gets a trophy kind of a thing. Uh, so that can maybe be the awards. But no, we really appreciate everyone who has participated. I think it makes it a fun part of the show to talk about what everyone's kind of what's the chatter going on in the D3 world, and maybe one of those things stumbles into a question. We can talk about that a little bit deeper or more in depth, like anyone cares about what we have to say. But it can be fun. It could be interesting.
Mailbag questions are a little bit like D3 game scheduling. There's certain games that those are good winning percentage games. There's some games that are great for SOS, and there are some games that you just don't need to play.
Yep.
Yep. Yeah, but for real, like some shout outs here to Max Fan. I know we've gotten some mailbag questions there. Dr. Jed Sieve, it was great to meet Jed in Fort Wayne. Jed's been a great mailbag submitter. Drew Latrenta, Hilltopper, um, Dan Tomey. I'm sorry if I'm going to forget any names, but we've had some great interactions on the mailbag. Thanks everyone who submitted. It's been a lot of fun to do the mailbag, and you know, I think we'll look to keep that rolling next season.
I think our friend Anonymous submitted several questions throughout the year, so shouts to Anonymous as well.
Yes, Anonymous was the number one submitter
Yep.
collectively.
Yep.
And that's a wrap, Matt. That's the mailbag ends the show. No more games, no more mailbag, no more show.
Not no more show though, because we will be back throughout the off season. Not every single week, but we will be there. We will be recording some topical episodes. We already have some ideas that we'll be working on in the coming weeks. So don't cancel your subscription to the feed. Keep an eye out. Keep an eye out on our social medias. Division three basketball is not over just because the season is over. We can still keep the conversation going. We are also interested in hearing from you, the listener, what you liked about the show, what you didn't like about the show, what segments you'd like to return, what segments you would like to see maybe changed or tweaked or adapted. Zach, you tweeted out a little feedback form. If anyone's interested in filling it out, that'd be great. Uh, we want to talk about things that are interesting. So I think that'll be in the description below, or also check the socials for that if you'd like to provide a little bit of feedback, and we'll take that under consideration.
Yeah, it was our goal to make a show that we wanted to do, and hopefully in doing that, we created a show that people wanted to listen to. So really interested in your feedback. Use that form. You can also send us any feedback you have through Twitter, Facebook, as a comment here on YouTube. The show won't be going weekly, but I think between the two of us, we've kind of talked about maybe coming up with something to keep active at least monthly. Although we're not committing to any certain schedule right now, but yeah, keep hit the subscribe button and click for notifications, because we're not going totally dark.
We'll be around. We'll see you next season. Until then, good job, team.
Good job, team.